Is a war imminent? And I mean a major global conflict. Is it imminent because of COVID-19? Now, if it were so, and if there were likely scenarios, these are the ones that we would most likely consider. You see, history shows us that developed countries are most aggressive when they are weakened economically. All right, let's take a look at what's happened because of COVID-19. The U.S., Japan, Germany, India, the UK, France, Italy, Brazil, Canada. They all, over the last decade, had shown some impressive economic growth. But because of COVID-19, or possibly because of their handling of COVID-19, specifically those countries, they have lost those gains, and their economies are now presently getting pummeled. Will those powerful but weakened countries lash out, and if so, where? See, the usually suggested hot zone is the Middle East, where the pressures between Israel and Iran and the Gulf states, combined with the vestiges of proxy wars in places like Yemen and Syria and Libya, and the disaster that's been left behind by the invasion of Iraq, could provide an obvious flashpoint. Then there's North Korea, a nuclear-armed country that has actually increased its arsenal over the last decade. The potential flashpoint there could result in a war with South Korea or even Japan. Also perennially included is chatter about any post-COVID-19 war would be Eastern Europe, where NATO expansion, followed by Russia's subsequent annexation of Crimea, has re-energized a Cold War with an enemy that really doesn't exist. The Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, but you wouldn't know it from the continued tensions that we see in that region. Okay, so those are the usual suspects that I just went through. You've heard those before, right? The Middle East, North Korea, Eastern Europe. But when it comes to this pandemic, there is a much more likely and feared scenario that is all about China, China, China. And here's why. For the United States and its allies, China is the perfect shill. In the environment of an ongoing pandemic, it has become the common enemy. China is accused of actually bioengineering the virus, censoring COVID-19 related queries, and covering up its Wuhan lab leak. All are accusations that China flatly denies, and for the most part, there is little to no evidence to any of it. So what might be the West's real issue with China then? It's this. You see, unlike the West, China has bounced back from its COVID-19 situation, that which caused a dip in its production, and it has actually come out even stronger. So while the United States, for example, may still be a year or two from recovering, economically speaking, take a look at this chart. This is kind of telling. This is what the world looked like before the pandemic. Look at the numbers for China. China was already way ahead of the pack when it comes to manufacturing, especially countries like the U.S., India, the UK, who are still struggling with the pandemic amid what's going on economically. So here's the question as you look at this, right? Because remember, this is a 2018 graph that I'm showing you, right? How much more will this allow China to pull ahead now? History points toward turmoil after pandemics and after economic recessions. As the world deals with both, is a conflict, a major war, inevitable, especially as we look at that. All right, let's drill down on all of this right here. Is a war imminent after COVID-19? And if so, where and why? Given what's going on because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and with what we have learned from history, is a war imminent? And might it come against China? Are we out to lunch here thinking that this situation could cause a bigger problem, or is this genuine?
No, I think you've summed it up brilliantly in your introduction. There are many flashpoints. But of all the flashpoints, the most dangerous is the one with China. And for the reasons that you adumbrated, the line of control between China and India, which has been in the news, and we've talked about it, might be the proximate cause of such a flare-up of violence. And there was a new provocation by India just this day on that line of control, just when you thought it was going quiet. And that would be suitable. Remember, President Trump recently visited India, has courted India remorselessly. That might well be the trigger point. But the warships are cheek by jowl in the South China Sea. Strategic bombers of the U.S. Air Force are flying over disputed territories in the South China Sea. China has bounced back incredibly from its coronavirus dip and is showing every sign of making 2020, after all of this, a Chinese year.
There's something about history that we should be paying particular attention to right now as we see countries face each other down amid a global pandemic and a global recession.
Yeah, history has shown that after every major pandemic, there is a major course change in the world. We saw this after the Black Plague that lasted for almost 300 years. It did away with the serfs and feudal lords, and actually resulted in the beginning of a middle class, the development of a middle class, because it lifted them up. And then you had wars in between. Yeah, we're in a very chaotic stage, and what you rightly pointed out is occurring in our world. Although nation states are more defined, except in some areas, as George points out, on the line of control between China and India and a few other places. We're seeing turmoil in Lebanon. These are all still remaining hotspots. The virus is going to have an impact on these countries for quite some time. Will it have we're seeing that China is expanding its Belt and Road Initiative now into these countries. Their influence is growing. We're seeing a China-Iran alliance developing. We're seeing those countries trying to get out from underneath the control of the dollar. And also the world financial system. But I will say one thing. We're seeing among the BRICS countries a differences of opinion, and many of those countries are siding with China on the Belt and Road Initiative. And BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa. You have China and India fighting between each other. Are they going to have cohesion from within their own entities when China seeks its own form of globalization? So this is what we're in, a period of uncertainty and turmoil, and we're seeing what's basically the epitome of a hybrid warfare developing around the world.
But here's what we know, George. We know that China is pulling ahead economically. That's why I wanted to show that chart. Heck, they were ahead before the pandemic, so they're going to be even more ahead now economically. Meanwhile, the United States continues to be way ahead when it comes to military might. What happens when a country with military might has to face off with a country with economic might? Who's the winner, and what usually happens in that situation? George, care to guess?
Well, the factor that we haven't touched on is that the United States currently looks like a supernova explosion, tearing itself apart, turning itself outside in. Total dysfunctionality on the political, governmental level, the splits in the security apparatus, and so on. The United States is not nearly as strong as perhaps it thinks it is, because its internals are all shot to pieces. At least that's how it looks from here. But it depends how big a war you're talking about.
Yeah.
If the United States wants to have a thermonuclear exchange with China, well, none of us will be talking ever again on RT America, or talking again at all, because that will be the end of the world. If you want to have a limited shooting war, well, China will win that in the South China Sea. That's my prediction.
Just real quick, 20 seconds to you. I have to have you at least make a comment on that, given your background at the Pentagon, Michael.
Yeah, I think that we're going to see a series of hybrid wars. We're going to because everyone's going to be jockeying for position. The Chinese are developing more aircraft carriers as they expand economically. They're going to have to develop a military that'll back that up.